Excellency Ambassador Yan Xiusheng, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary, Ambassador of the People's Republic of China to Barbados, Colonel Glenn Granham, Chief of Staff, Barbados Defense Force, Mr. Hugh Raleigh, Secretary General and CEO, Caribbean Tourism Organization, Dr. Don Marshall, heads of Sir Arthur Lewis Institute for Social and Economic Studies, Dr. Delay Worrell and Mrs. Worrell, UE faculty and students, other members of the diplomatic communities, all distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, members of the media, good evening. My name is Song Qingbao. So I'm the Chinese co-director of the Confucius Institute in the UEQ Hill campus. I feel greatly honored to make these opening remarks for the Confucius Institute Day Lecture. Many of you may have the question, what is Confucius Institute Day? Or what is Confucius Institute? Or even, who is Confucius? So I would like to make a very brief explanation of the three phrases. The first is Confucius. Confucius is a Chinese educator and philosopher. He was born in China, Shandong province. I'm very glad my hometown is also Shandong province. He was born in 551 BC. So today, he would be 2,569 years old. I'm glad I'm not that old. He was the first Chinese private teacher, and it was said he has more than 3,000 disciples. So he has made outstanding contribution to the development of Chinese education. His philosophy is called Confucianism. Centered ideas such as benevolence means to love the others. Harmonious but different. The world is for all. So Confucianism is one of the most influential school of thought, just like Christianity, Buddhism, Islam. So it not only dominated Chinese culture for more than 2,000 years, but also has influenced many of the other countries, such as Japan, Korea, Vietnam, Philippines, Malaysia, Singapore. So the second one is Confucius Institute. So it was given the name after the famous educator and philosopher. It was first established in 2004. So by the end of the last year, 2017, in the world, there were already 525 Confucius Institutes, including 171 in the American continent. There are 110 in the United States, 12 in Canada, 10 in Brazil, and 5 in Mexico. There are also 5 in the English-speaking Caribbean, respectively, that is Barbados, Jamaica, Trinidad, Bahamas, and Guyana. So the third is Confucius Institute Day. So this day was first celebrated in 2014 on the occasion of the 10th anniversary of the establishment of the Confucius Institute. So on this day, that is today actually, on the 27th September, the Confucius Institute from 146 countries will hold the Chinese activity together to present a feast of Chinese culture globally. So the Confucius Institute Day here in Barbados is celebrated in 3 parts. The first part is the conference. So we participated in the conference called the Foreign Language Teaching and Learning Hands-on Conference, so organized by the Department of Language, Linguistics, and Literature in the Faculty of Humanities and Education. So our teachers from the institute, so they will discuss with the other teachers to teach the foreign language, such as the Spanish, the French, the Italian, and the Portuguese, how to be more effective to teach the language in the Caribbean. So it really helps us to improve the teaching quality, how to improve our Chinese teaching quality. Oh, there's big rain. So the second one is the Confucius Institute Open Day. That is tomorrow in the Confucius Institute. I hope there's no rain tomorrow. So we have a lot of activities, like we have the Chinese tea, we have the table tennis, we have a Chinese calligraphy sing. So all are welcome to enjoy. And the third one is here is the Confucius Institute Lecture. So that means every year we have 2 lectures. The first is a Confucius Institute Lecture. That is in January. This year, delivered by Dr. Delay Worrell. So next year, we will, besides the lecture, we also facilitate the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute for the Social and Economic Studies, SALISIS. Together with the China University of Political Science and Law, we will hold a one-day symposium to explore the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative and also its relations with the Caribbean. So it's the clearest indication that this institute not only focuses on the Chinese teaching and cultural activities, but also we have begun to pay much more attention to the research and publications. So that's because our institute is, we're trying our best to serve for the links and the bridges for the in-depth communication and understanding between China and Barbados and the rest of the Caribbean. So in conclusion, thanks to Ambassador Dr. Chelston Brathwaite for agreeing to present this lecture. And thanks to you all for attending, especially during this weather. I thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Song. And now I'd like to introduce the Deputy Principal, Professor Clive Landis, to do the remarks on behalf of the university. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. His Excellency Ambassador Yan Shusheng, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of the Embassy of the People's Republic of China, Colonel Glenn Granham, Chief of Staff, Barbados Defence Force, Mr. Hugh Riley, Secretary General and CEO of the Caribbean Tourism Organization, Dr. Chelston Brathwaite, former Ambassador of Barbados, and Mrs. Brathwaite, Mr. Delay Worrell, former head of the Central Bank, and Mrs. Worrell, other members of the diplomatic community, Dr. Don Marshall, Director of SALISIS, UE colleagues and students, ladies and gentlemen, members of the media, good evening. I must at the outset convey deepest regrets on behalf of Pro Vice Chancellor and Principal of the University of the West Indies Cafil Campus, Professor Udine Barito, who is out of the island on business and so could not be with us this evening. She has asked me to extend her very best wishes for a successful public lecture, and moreover her hope that the lecture will provoke further dialogue on this important topic. I take great pleasure in delivering remarks at this lecture by distinguished former Ambassador of Barbados to the People's Republic of China, Dr. Chelston Brathwaite, on the occasion of the Confucius Institute Day. I do so not only in my capacity as Deputy Principal, but also as a member of the Board of Directors of the Confucius Institute. And given my close association with the Confucius Institute since its inception of 2015, in which time I have witnessed a remarkable growth over the past 3+ years. The Confucius Institute is a joint undertaking between the Cave campus of the UE and the China University of Political Science and Law, whose aim is to help connect the region via the Yui to the vast potential for cooperation with China. I wish to explain to members of the public the Confucius Institute structure, which has a host university, and you've heard that there are 525 host universities around the world, and they are paired with a Chinese university. So in our case, the Cave Hill campus is paired with the China University of Political Science and Law, and Dr. Song Qingbao is from CUPL. Our relationship with CUPL has been a wonderfully productive one, and sometimes quite competitive, as I will come to later. Okay, there goes the pointer. The Confucius Institute has fit seamlessly into the university's AAA 2017-22 strategic plan, which has a vision to be an excellent global university rooted in the Caribbean, in which globalization and the Smart Campus Initiative are identified as key vehicles to deliver the strategic plan. Just yesterday, we received an external validation of our vision to be a global university. This came from the release in Singapore of the annual Times Higher Education University Global Rankings list. THE is the most prestigious university ranking organization that lists the top 5% of universities around the world. I am pleased to say that UE broke into the THE World Rankings for the first time and moved straight into the top 3% of universities. Please let me highlight some of the initiatives in which the CI has been engaged or has actively supported. The Confucius Institute will continue this academic year in coordination with the Ministry of Education, Technological and Vocational Training to undertake the teaching of 2 long-term pilot programs in primary and secondary schools. Following a start with the Ellerslie Secondary School and the St. Stephen Primary School, the CI Schools program has expanded to the Springer Memorial and the Charles F. Brum schools, and an after-school program is expected to commence at the Combermere School. The Confucius Institute at the Cave Hill campus is currently the only official testing site in the Eastern Caribbean recognized for certifying proficiency testing in the Chinese language. The Confucius Institute has administered 6 series of HSK and YCT examinations. These would be for secondary schools and primary schools. Of 93 students sitting the HSK and 49 students sitting the YCT, with the latter being taken by students from the Ellerslie Secondary School, the first class of secondary students anywhere in the Eastern Caribbean to do so. Efforts are underway to place the HSK exams online, and this is in keeping with the UE Smart Campus Initiative and the emphasis on increasing access to the teaching services offered by the campus. Oh, I'm sorry, I just recognized that I didn't acknowledge Chelston's daughter in the audience as well. My apologies. The Confucius Institute has further assisted the Caribbean Examination Council with the development of the curriculum for a secondary school certificate in Chinese as part of its modern language offerings. The CXC is currently undertaking a review of all its modern language offerings, including Chinese, to conform to the requirements of the CXC language framework. The Cave Hill campus, with the Confucius Institute, will continue to provide ongoing assistance to the CXC to facilitate the introduction of the Chinese language curriculum in the Caribbean. Here on campus, the Confucius Institute has worked closely with the Faculty of Humanities and Education to develop, from the start of this academic year, a minor in Chinese studies. The Mandarin language teachers at the Confucius Institute, I think I see some of them sitting there, are working with the faculty to monitor the advance of the first cohort of students as they progress through their minor in Chinese studies. I'm told it's quite a popular program. The Confucius Institute has also played a key supporting role to students pursuing the BSc in the Software Engineering Mobile Technologies degree program. You're probably wondering, why is he speaking about software engineering? Well, this is a very special program where in conjunction with the Global Institute for Software Technology in Suzhou in China, where the first 2 years of this program are here in Cave Hill, and the next 2 years are in Suzhou in China. So the first cohort of 27 UE students, which include 9 from the Cave Hill campus, have now started the Chinese leg of their program at GIST, and this is under the agreement of the UE China Institute of Information Technology initiative. This 4-year degree program not only has the potential to promote bicultural and bilingual Caribbean graduates, but also offers the region highly specialized, skilled graduates in the burgeoning field of mobile technology applications, very much in keeping with the Smart Campus initiative. The CI has also collaborated with the Faculty of Law at Cave Hill. We're looking for your next collaboration with the Faculty of Sport, because there's one collaboration with every faculty, to host the first ever Caribbean International Law Moot competition, which was in May 2017, between law students at Cave Hill and law students at CUPL. Now, this is where things start to get a bit competitive. In 2017, the students from the China University of Political Science and Law came to Cave Hill, and they won the main prize at the final of the moot court competition, which was held in the Barbados Supreme Court, although the Cave Hill did win the Best Individual Oralist. This year, we sent 4 of our top law students, 1 each from Barbados, Antigua and Barbuda, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and Trinidad and Tobago, to CUPL in Beijing, so into the den of the dragon, if you want. And we won all of the top prizes in all of the categories of the moot competition. What is clear to the Confucius Institute board at both the Cave Hill and CUPL is that we have succeeded in establishing a productive working relationship between the 2 institutions based on mutual respect and understanding. The extensive and rapid achievements of our Confucius Institute at Cave Hill have been recognized by the Hanban headquarters in China with the award of Confucius Institute of the Year in 2017, and that is the youngest Confucius Institute ever to be awarded this distinction. And we share our joy at Cave Hill in receiving this award with our partners at CUPL. And so much more is planned as the Cave Hill campus continues to expand its relationship with China to attract students from China to attend the Cave Hill campus. An exchange of legal scholars between CUPL and the Cave Hill campus. This follows on from the signing of an MOU to establish a joint Caribbean Chinese law center, the first of its kind in the Caribbean. The Joint Caribbean Chinese Law Center is intended as a hub to enhance knowledge of the law in each other's jurisdictions, which is increasingly important to Caribbean economies as business with China expands. A symposium scheduled for January 24th, 2019, and research cluster on the China Belt and Road Initiative is being coordinated by the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute of Social and Economic Studies, and that would be under Don Marshall here at Cave Hill. And finally, I am pleased to inform you that plans are progressing well for the Agro-Business Science Park at Duke's in St. Thomas, the planned site of the Cave Hill Center for Food Security and Entrepreneurship. This initiative is supported with a bilateral grant between the People's Republic of China and the Ministry of Education, Technological and Vocational Training, and it is poised to become the single most important thrust in agribusiness development and related entrepreneurship in Barbados and the Eastern Caribbean. So tonight's inaugural Confucius Institute Day Lecture fits into the natural progression by the Institute into the wider academic life and dialogue on the relationship of Barbados with China. Next year, we're already planning with our Chinese counterparts to welcome a distinguished speaker from China for the 2019 Confucius Institute Day Lecture, with speakers thereafter alternating between Barbados, the Eastern Caribbean, and China. In conclusion, therefore, let me state that the lecture by the distinguished former ambassador of Barbados to China, Dr. Chelston Brathwaite, is not just a celebration of Confucius Day worldwide, but part of the well-laid plans of the Confucius Institute at the Cave Hill campus to assist in building a bridge to China. It is part of Pillar 4, on which the Confucius Institute is founded, increasing mutual understanding. Thus far, the Confucius Institute at the Cave Hill campus has served as a key pillar of that bridge and placed the campus at the forefront of the regional endeavor to deepen and strengthen relationships with China. We look forward to the continuation and expansion of the work of the Confucius Institute at the Cave Hill campus. I thank you and wish you a very pleasant good evening.
Thank you, Deputy Principal. And now it is my privilege to introduce Dr. Don Marshall, who is the Director and Senior Fellow at the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute of Social and Economic Studies. And I should also mention he is a board member of the Confucius Institute, and his task is to introduce the principal speaker this evening. Thank you.
Good night all. Honorable Excellency Ambassador Yan Shuxing, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary from the Embassy of the People's Republic of China, Colonel Glenn Granham, Chief of Staff, Barbados Defense Force, Mr. Hugh Riley, Secretary General and CEO of the Caribbean Tourism Organization, Dr. Dilel Worrell and his wife, welcome. The Deputy Principal of the University of the West Indies, who just spoke to you, Professor Clive Landis. I also want to acknowledge David Bubuya, who is our chair for the evening's proceedings. And of course, we heard from Dr. Song Qingbo. I know his English name, you see, so, we don't normally call him by his Chinese name. We normally have Paul, right? Paul, of course. So that's another story in itself. Anyway, at this point, my task is to introduce the speaker. It's very rare that we would, from the University of the West Indies, welcome one of our own who is also very accomplished internationally in terms of a global institution, and that global institution claims him. So we have the Food and Agriculture Organization, and we also have the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation on Agriculture, ICA, that would also claim him as justifiably their own. Normally we will have an accomplished academic who's performed and engaged in some public service and has done, hopefully, some public good. But in Dr. Brathwaite, we have almost three individuals rolled into one. He is an accomplished and published scholar in his own right. Let me begin with that. And in every decade since his being awarded a PhD in 1970, he has made a contribution to knowledge within his field of expertise, plant pathology, and wider understandings of agriculture and its contribution it should make to national development as well as the promotion of food security. So in every decade of his professional life, after acquiring a PhD, he has made a contribution to knowledge. So that's like one career role in one for which we can celebrate and applaud. Apart from that, his early sojourn with the Food and the FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization, saw him also playing a useful role, but he would develop some skills there that he would take into ICA. And apart from the program outlining that he was, and that's quite significant, the first black individual to head that organization. He was the 9th Director General of ICA, and he was the first Barbadian, first West Indian, first person of African descent to achieve this position in the 70-year history of the Institute. So like Sir Arthur Lewis, with whom my institute is named after, you have a first black, because Sir Arthur Lewis was and remains the only black person in the history of the field of economics to be awarded a Nobel Prize. So Chelston is very special to us here at the university, even though his association with the University of the West Indies would have, in terms of formal understanding, ended in the 80s. Nevertheless, Chelston has been influential in the shaping of the School of Agriculture at St. Augustine campus right through to this century up to 2012. He was involved in the reform of the Faculty of Agriculture at the St. Augustine campus. He was also chair of the Barbados Agricultural Commission, and those of you familiar with the local scene will know about the role that he has played in terms of being an activist champion of food security and so on, whilst at the Barbados Agricultural Commission. We were, as a country, very happy that he was asked to be the second ambassador to China, because we knew that this was someone that was going to carry the interests of Barbados forward. He continues to be a beacon and someone that we can all admire in terms of being a sound academic, a sound technician, a useful public intellectual, but someone who is very much steeped in the understandings and the wisdoms of administration. And in many ways, he can speak to policy science in ways that, say, I can't, because of his practical experience working day to day in trying to build up ICA and trying to make a contribution in terms of extending the foundations laid at our mission in China, Beijing. I want to take on this occasion on the Confucius Institute Day to have Chelston welcome back home and to have him speak to the topic, a very topical China, a window of opportunity for Barbados and the Caribbean. As we know, I told him just now I wish this lecture come a year ago, because we in Barbados and like our Jamaican and Kittian and Grenadian brothers and sisters are embarking on an engagement with one of the Bretton Woods institutions, the IMF. And as we speak, there are alternate institutions in the world that are making a contribution to a deep dive into not only industrial deepening, but deeper forms of economic diversification. And China, with its own co-prosperity initiatives, are joining with the United States, Britain, and those who have gone before, and Japan, with co-prosperity initiatives of their own. And it's for developing countries to navigate what these mean for their own development circumstance, and to do so wisely without necessarily denationalizing their economies or defaulting on sovereignty. So with that, for those few remarks, I will want to welcome Chelston, and we hope that we can build from here onwards with further education and teachings about China's role in the world today. Thank you.
Don't worry, the lecture is not going to be in Chinese. Mr. Chairman, Professor Landis, Mr. David Bubulia, Dr. Don Marshall, Zongo Ju Barbadosi Dashi, Yang Yusheng, Guxia, Wang Shenhao, and Gao Xingzai Jiandangni. Other members of the diplomatic corps, Dr. Worrell and Mrs. Worrell, Mr. Hugh Riley, Secretary General, CEO of Caribbean Tourism Organization, Lieutenant Commander Brathwaite of the Barbados Coast Guard, Colonel Glenn Granham of the Barbados Defense Force, Distinguished friends, members of my family. I see a lot of family here. Started with my wife, Rosanna, my daughter, Ria, Corinne, Trevor, Ursula. I have a lot of family members here today, a lot of family support. All my friends from the university, from ICA, from FAO, from various countries around the world, members of the media, the press, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Wan Chan Hao. I am particularly moved by the introduction presented by Dr. Don Marshall. I thank you for your kind words. And I feel humbled by all that you have said about me. The things that you have said about me, if I were a politician, I would get you to be my campaign manager. Because I figured with that introduction I would get some votes. Clearly, I'm impressed by the work of the Confucius Institute and the report presented by Professor Landis, and I salute the university and I salute the initiatives that they have taken in embracing the Confucius Institute here on this campus. And the work that has been done over the 3.5 years is indeed impressive. I would like to congratulate the university, and I would like to convey to the principal and to the Vice Chancellor my congratulations on this important initiative. Let me begin by thanking the chair, Dr. Bobulia and Paul, for inviting me to give this Confucius lecture. Also appreciate the kind introduction. I accept the honor, and I'm grateful for the privilege to be here. At a certain time last night, I didn't think we'd have a lecture today at all. As a matter of fact, I went to sleep thinking that tomorrow will be a restful day at home, taking it easy. But here I am, and I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad to have been invited to give this lecture. I fail to recognize Dr. Carol Jacobs. Thanks for being here. Dr. Carol Jacobs is my physician. Keeps me healthy, functioning. I wish to begin by taking this opportunity to thank the previous government of Barbados for the opportunity to serve my country as Barbados' second resident ambassador to China during the period 2014 to 2017. That 4-year period of my life was a fascinating experience, and which I treasure. The invitation came when I was planning to retire, under a coconut tree, in a hammock, with my guitar, maybe with a rum and coconut water, a collection of books for light reading, and to take it easy. After an interesting career at the university, FAO and ICA, I thought, I've done enough, time to rest. There are other people who thought otherwise. And I was invited to assume the responsibility for the embassy in Beijing. And when I was going, I know a lot of my family had concerns. One member of my family said, "You're going to China? We don't have any family over there. That's so far. If anything happened to you over there, what's going to happen?" And when we did a little farewell, it was like I was not going to come back. But here I am, back in Barbados, and glad to be here. Let me see whether the technology is working and tell you what I'm going to do this evening. What I propose to do is to review a little bit of the current relationship between Barbados and the People's Republic of China. I will indicate that the time has indeed come to strengthen the relationship and deepen the relationship by the establishment of a comprehensive strategic partnership. I will point out the need to emphasize a multi-sectoral approach to diplomatic relations with China. I will also speak to the need for a regional approach in our relations with China. And I will give some elements of a potential regional agenda between China and the Caribbean, which I think could be considered. Let me begin by telling you that China is at the center of a shift in global economic power. Mr. Tony Blair, former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, in a recent newspaper report, is reported to have said, and I quote, "How China develops and its role in the world has massive implications for everyone today. There is no big problem that can be resolved without China." End of quote. Recently, another Prime Minister, Mr. Kevin Rudd, Prime Minister of Australia, is reported to have said, "The shifting balance of economic power is also beginning to be seen globally when China's economic presence in Africa, Latin America, and Europe also challenging the long-standing economic primacy of the United States. China's growing global economic and political role will also reshape international norms, rules, and institutions. It will reverberate across geopolitics, global trade and capital flows, reserve currency status, climate change, other environmental challenges, and global people's movement. It will influence the great questions of war and peace in the decades ahead." End of quote. Both Mr. Tony Blair and Mr. Kevin Rudd were expressing a fundamental truth that since the reform and opening up of China some 40 years ago, China's impact on the world, whether it is in the stock market, commodity prices, or climate change, has had important global implications. Given this global reality, what should China mean to Barbados and the rest of the Caribbean? Why should we have a relationship with China? In order to address these questions, it is necessary to take a historical look at our foreign policy and analyze it in the context of current realities. On the 6th of December 1966, our first Prime Minister, the late Right Honorable Errol Walton Barrow, gave Barbados' foreign policy its enduring moral compass in his inaugural speech to the United Nations, and he said, and I quote, "We have no quarrels to pursue, and we particularly insist that we do not regard any member state as our natural opponent. We shall not involve ourselves in sterile ideological wrangling because we are exponents not of the diplomacy of power, but of the diplomacy of peace and prosperity. We will not regard any great power as necessarily right in a given dispute unless we are convinced of this. Yet at the same time, we will not view the great powers with perennial suspicion merely on account of their size, their wealth, or their nuclear potential. We will be friends of all and satellites of none. End of quote. 42 years later, in 2008, also at the United Nations General Assembly, our Prime Minister, the late Honorable David Thompson, in referring to Barrow's speech, set out some further elements of what I will call the Barbados philosophy of foreign relations. I quote, Thompson said, "Because we are a Caribbean country, we will partner with our fellow Caribbean states to protect our shared patrimony, the Caribbean Sea, from overexploitation and environmental degradation, and to secure our borders from the threats of drugs and arms trafficking, money laundering, and terrorism. We are fervent advocates of the notion of the Caribbean as a zone of peace, and we view with great concern any action from whatever quarter that seeks to reintroduce the anachronism of Cold War rivalry into our peaceful regional community of nations. And finally, because we are a responsible member of the international community, we believe in the positive role that small island states can play in advancing the cause of international peace and equitable economic and social development. We rededicate ourselves to the building of an international system that operates on the principle of multilateralism and that respects the sovereign equality of states and the tenets of genuine non-alignment." End of quote. These profound statements have shaped Barbados's foreign policy over the years. Barbados and the People's Republic of China established diplomatic relations on the 30th of May 1977. The Tom Adams administration, with Sir Henry Ford as foreign minister, took the historic step to recognize Beijing as the legitimate government of China, and since then, Barbados has supported the One China policy. At that time, it was not the popular thing to do, as small states establishing diplomatic relations with communist countries was not perceived in the West as a desirable thing to do. It was not until 2010 that the Barbados government opened an embassy in Beijing. Our first resident ambassador was former Prime Minister Sir Lloyd Erskine Sandiford, who served from 2010 to 2013, and in 2014, I was invited to be the second Prime Minister, the second ambassador. Since establishing diplomatic relations, Barbados has pursued a policy of cooperation with the People's Republic of China based on mutual respect and the pursuit of shared values between our people and the people and government of China. The relationship has been fruitful and cordial over these years. The relationship continues to be strengthened by the exchange of visits by high-level officials, the conclusion of a number of agreements, and by the implementation of a number of projects of significance to the social and economic development of Barbados. The visit of the President of the Republic of China, of the People's Republic of China, His Excellency Mr. Xi Jinping, to the Caribbean in 2013, when he met with Caribbean leaders in Port-au-Spain, was a particularly significant event in Caribbean-China relations. In that meeting, fruitful discussions were held to increase cooperation between China and the Caribbean, and the President of China offered to make available to the Caribbean $3 billion in loans and grants. Let me share with you a few of the achievements during the period 2014 to 2017 to give you some idea of the nature of the relationship at this point in time. During this period, there were visits by Barbadians from the public and private sector who participated in training courses in business, finance, tourism, and agriculture. The objective of these courses was to facilitate and encourage and promote trade and commercial contacts between Barbados and China. The then Minister of Sports, Culture and Youth Affairs, Mr. Stephen Lashley, visited China and signed a memorandum of understanding designed to facilitate greater cooperation in culture and sports between our two countries. Barbados and China conclude an agreement abolishing the need for visas for Chinese visiting Barbados and Barbadians visiting China. The then Minister of Education, Mr. Ronald Jones, visited China and signed a memorandum of understanding with the Ministry of Education in China to promote cooperation in education, science, and technology. A Confucius Institute was established at Cave Hill to provide opportunities for Barbadians to become more aware of Chinese language and culture and to strengthen cooperation and understanding between the people of Barbados and the people of China. A Barbados-China treaty regarding mutual legal assistance, as well as a treaty on cooperation on matters of extradition, was concluded. The Chief Justice of Barbados, Sir Marston Gibson, visited China and held fruitful discussions with the legal fraternity in Beijing in areas that are of strategic importance to strengthen the relationship between China and Barbados in the area of law and governance. The then principal of the Cave Hill campus, Sir Hilary Beckles, visited China and signed an agreement with the Suzhou Institute of Technology for cooperation between that institution and Cave Hill to train Barbadian and Caribbean nationals in software engineering and software development. And you heard earlier this evening from Professor Landis that the first cohort of students have now left the Caribbean and are in China, completing their studies in software engineering and software development. China continues to provide Barbados with a number of scholarships to ensure that we continue to educate the next generation of Barbadians in such critical areas as information technology, medicine, agriculture, sustainable energy, actuarial science, and ecology. There are now some 30 Barbadian students studying in China. Barbados also signed a number of agreements which resulted in refurbishment of some of the country's most visible landmarks: the Elsie Payne Complex, headquarters of the Ministry of Education, the Garfield Sobers Gymnasium, and the Lloyd Erskine Sandiford Center. China facilitated cooperation in security training for several officers of the Barbados Defense Force. China supplied teams of medical doctors and nurses to Barbados based on a cooperation agreement between the Queen Elizabeth Hospital and medical facilities in China. China is providing financial assistance in the development of the Center for Food Security and Entrepreneurship in the university related to the lands provided at Duke's Plantation and in the implementation of the Hope Agricultural Project with the Ministry of Education based in St. Lucie. And Barbados has recently received a loan of $240 million from the Export-Import Bank of China, the Exim Bank, to fund the redevelopment of Sam Lord's Castle. The sum was obtained at the interest rate of 2.5% with a 5-year moratorium. The loan was seen as the beginning of a new era of cooperation between Barbados and China. In 2015, and again in 2016, cultural groups from Barbados came to China as part of the Meet in Beijing Cultural Festival. Among those participating in 2015 were the Mighty Gabby and Nikita Brown, and in 2016, Alison Hines and Nicholas Branca participated. The Chinese enjoyed the music of Barbados, and those events helped to deepen the cultural and social relations between Barbados and China. I should also tell you that today, Ambassador Robin Rihanna Fenty, better known as Rihanna, is the best-known Barbadian in China. This is a snapshot of Barbadian artists in China in 2014. Not a perfect shot, but I thought I would include it just to give you a smattering of what they did there. Dr. Walcott on the keyboard. Express in Chayun Park in Beijing in 2014 and represented one of the first cultural interactions during our time there. You would all recognize this gentleman.
Saturday morning, you see the children calling, come for the red fruit, come for the pie, come for the apples, fresh as the morning, come for the banana, come for potato, come for the guava, guava, guava.
This cultural extravaganza was well received in Beijing by the Chinese. It exposed the elements of our cultural offering. And this was repeated by Alison Hines and Mr. Nicholas Branker 2 years later. Again, it was well received and is part of our efforts to build that bridge of cooperation in culture and music.
Living legend, y'all. Living legend. Want to dedicate this one once again to all the lovers here. Well,
I have to thank my brother Trevor for making this possible. Brought some technical expertise to help me to get this together.
Trusting your heart to anyone. You told me you're gonna play it smart. Through before you start, I'm meant for you to kiss that tree goodbye. When it's this good, there's no saying no. Hey, I want you so.
I would not say that the Chinese were whining in Beijing, but they enjoyed the music and they got a taste of our culture. I believe that these initiatives in their totality can make the basis for the foundation or are the foundation of a comprehensive strategic partnership in culture, in business. The relationship, the loans, etc., are important. We believe that given the new global scenario and where China is today, it is necessary to strengthen our relationship and relook our strategy. In that regard, let me tell you a little bit about China today. The fall of the Berlin Wall, the end of the Cold War, the disintegration of the Soviet Union as a world power, the freedom of South Africa from apartheid, democratic reforms in Latin America, the Middle East, Africa, globalization, have resulted in a new global environment and radical changes in diplomatic relations around the world in the 21st century. Mr. Ramcharan, in a recent book called Global Tilt, concludes that the world has tilted. The global economic center has shifted from what has traditionally been called the advanced or Western countries of Northern Hemisphere to the fast developing countries, including China, India, Indonesia, Brazil, countries in the Middle East, and even parts of Africa. Charan concludes that the world is in a transition to a more even distribution of opportunity and wealth. Several recent economic reports confirm that there's a definite tilt, a definite shift, a pivot toward Asia in general, and a pivot toward China in particular. This pivot is one of the main features of the global economic system of the 21st century. And as the world economy recovers from the 2007-2008 financial crisis, and countries seek new opportunities for investment and trade, the pivot is likely to continue. The international financial service sectors in small economies like ours is under threat. FATCA legislation, new national regulations in developed economies like Canada, the United States, the Panama Papers, de-risking, OECD mandates. These have all impacted us here in Barbados. The world is becoming more interconnected, more multinational, more multicultural. Social media and instant communication and new forms of mobile information technology are new features of our world. It is no secret that China seeks to play an increasingly important role in world affairs. It is sufficiently prosperous to do so. And as Confucius said, since this is Confucius Day, as Confucius said eons ago, he who wants success should enable others to succeed. End of quote. Since 2010, China has been contributing more money to other developing countries than the World Bank. In fact, China's economic role today is very important for global economic growth because China has become the global processing center for exports to the world and the manufacturing capital of the world. You can hardly pick up an item today that is not made in China. At the same time, China is the major world purchaser of most types of commodities. So not only is China exporting, but China is also buying a significant amount of commodities, including minerals and agricultural commodities. China has set out a clear foreign policy based on the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence, peaceful development, win-win approaches, and the promotion of a community of common destiny. In several forums, China has reassured the world that they share core global values such as economic and technological progress, multilateralism, growth of world trade, food safety and security, environmental protection, nuclear non-proliferation, and the fight against terrorism. Those who spend their time reflecting on the negatives of China's communist history and the negative reports on China, which are normally presented in the Western press, are failing to appreciate the new China. In 1978, China abandoned its communist development model and under the leadership of President Deng Xiaoping, began a program of economic reform to open up China to the world. The early stages of the reform program was concentrated on 4 elements: reform of agriculture, reform of industry, reform of science and technology, and reform of defense. Deng Xiaoping established special economic zones in the coastal cities of Shenzhen, Zhuhai, Chengdu, and Xiamen. These zones were designated to attract foreign investment and foreign technology. They were business-oriented and had an economic management system that was more attractive to foreign investment. In my opinion, and that of many others, China's economic model of reform and opening up was anchored on 3 Ps: pragmatism, planning, and people. The success is based, in my view, on 6 elements which are rooted in Chinese culture, rooted in Chinese history, and rooted in Chinese philosophy. Those 6 elements are strong and decisive leadership, long-term planning. Chinese friend of mine told me the Chinese has a plan to 2050. An effective and enviable work ethic, national stability and national cohesion, rapid incorporation of education, science, technology, and innovation in development, patriotism, and a commitment to national renewal. It is important for us to recognize that in the 17th century, China was one of the most successful economies in the world. So that in China today, the Chinese speak of national renewal, not to start over again, but to recapture where they were 200 years ago as leaders in economy in the world. Chinese history is very rich and interesting in that regard. Given the reform, what then have been some of the results of this reform process? This year marks the 40th anniversary of the implementation of the reform process in China that started in 1978, 40 years. What have the Chinese achieved in 40 years? In 1950, China was a poor rural economy, like Barbados was at that time. In 1978, China GDP was $150 billion. Today, China's GDP is some $12 trillion and 15% of global GDP. In 2011, China leaped past Japan as the world's 2nd largest economy with a GDP of $11.3 trillion. The USA GDP at that time was $15.68 trillion. China has achieved spectacular growth in the last 25 years, the GDP doubling between 1997 and 2004 with an annual growth rate of 8.3%. China has obtained its spectacular growth without the intervention of the IMF or the World Bank. China holds the world's largest foreign reserves of $3.3 trillion. It's interesting to note that they hold 1.2 trillion of US Treasury notes. 1.2 trillion. It's investing 74 billion around the world. 15 billion is earmarked for investment in Latin America and the Caribbean. China has become the manufacturing capital of the world. With a population of 1.3 billion, it is the largest consumer market in the world. Since 2010, China is contributing more money to other developing countries than the World Bank. China has become the #1 source market for tourists in the world, with some 100 million tourists in 2013 traveling the world and spending $1.2 billion. If tourism is your business, this should be of interest. 100 million Chinese are traveling, spending $102 billion in the world. In 2013, China proposed the establishment of the Asian Infrastructure Development Bank with a startup capital of $100 billion. The bank is geared to fostering long-term infrastructure development in the world. Today, 86 countries around the world have become members of this bank, including the United Kingdom, Canada, Argentina, Chile, Venezuela, Singapore, Maldives, Samoa, and Brazil. It's not only a bank for big countries, also a bank for small countries. China has become a leader in technology and innovation and the use of and the generation of energy from renewable sources. China has modern infrastructure, some of the most modern infrastructure in the world, and the largest high-speed network of rail in the world. By 2020, the network will be 30,000 kilometers. That's 19,000 miles. It means if you could stretch it out, you could walk from here to China. In the last 30 years, China has moved some 529 million Chinese out of poverty. And I wish to emphasize, these are United Nations figures. China has moved 529 Chinese out of poverty to a better living standard and have in fact achieved an important Millennium Development Goal. China has the largest population in the world. Of this 1.3 billion, a recent report indicates that 2.3 billion are millionaires and 358 are billionaires. And a middle class of about 500 million people who are adventurous with exotic tastes seeking to explore the world. Let me say a few words about the Chinese middle class. And I'm quoting this from a book I'm writing, so I'm quoting myself. The Chinese middle class is growing very rapidly. In the year 2000, only 4% of the urban population could be considered middle class. A recent report by McKinney & Company predicts that by 2022, 76% of the urban population will be middle class. In 2015, the urban population was estimated at 750 million, which means that by 2022, China will have 550 million urban people in the middle class. These trends have important implications for consumption and economic growth. Chinese consumption is expected to grow at 9% per year through 2020, according to the Boston Consulting Group. Chinese also have lower levels of personal debt to GDP ratio. This ratio is reported to be about 40% in China, whereas in many Western countries it is 87%. The lower debt level is expected to result in higher levels of disposable income and higher levels of consumption. The Chinese consumer economy is expected to reach 6.5 trillion by 2020, an increase of 2.3 trillion compared to current levels. This increase will be 1.3 times larger than the economy of Germany or the United Kingdom. According to Karas and Gertz, as cited by Ram Charan, India will account for 23% of global middle-class consumption, By 2030, China 18%, the United States 7%, Germany and France 2%. The expanding middle class and consumer markets of the emerging economies will create new sources of global growth and job opportunities. More recently, a survey by Ogilvy and Matter, as reported in the China Daily, identifies 12 emerging markets that will be key to middle-class consumer growth going forward in the next decade. These include India, China, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Indonesia, and the Philippines. When Egypt, Nigeria, Mexico, and Brazil are included, the author suggests that 1 billion new middle-class members will be added to the global economy in the next 10 years. And that this will create a new tipping point as the middle class move from being a minority to a majority in these countries. Let me say a few words about China's technological advances. Not much attention has been given to China as a source of advanced technology and research, but China's technological advances are also an important dimension of the global tilt. On October 17, 2016, a Long March 2F rocket carrying the Shenzhou 11 manned spacecraft blasted off from Jiuquan Satellite Launch Center in Jiangsu Province, carrying 2 Chinese astronauts into space. The astronauts stayed in the space laboratory for 30 days, carrying out research and engineering experiments, and testing rendezvous and docking technologies and verifying the life support capacity of the docked spacecraft and laboratory. China's technological advances are reinforced by China's New Year Development Plan, which emphasizes innovation-driven development. China plans to provide high-atmosphere passenger services to space by 2020. On November 9th, Chinese President Xi Jinping made a video call to the 2 Chinese astronauts circling the Earth. These achievements are part of China's technological development in the last 30 years. China has become the 3rd country after Russia and the United States to develop advanced space technology and to send people into space. In addition to the advances in space technology, China has also advanced in some of the areas of science and technology, including advances in development of high-speed rail technology, advances in satellite and microsatellite technology, advances in solar technology, advances in the use of robots and robotic technology, advances in e-commerce and internet shopping, and advances in information technology. Microsatellites, usually weighing less than 500 grams, have become an important product of China's microsatellite industry. These small satellites are now within the reach of private companies and are being used to watch over the globe and provide vital information on traffic flows, environmental changes, provide full-time Wi-Fi signals, and prepare digital maps. In other words, China's microsatellite technology is an important export product for China. In information technology, China is producing a number of global brands, including Huawei and Xiaomi, which are giving the American products such as Apple, iPhone great competition. According to recent reports, China is also a leader in the development of quantum science globally and will launch the first quantum satellite soon and will build a 1,000-kilometer quantum communication line linking Shanghai and Beijing. The communication line will incorporate quantum-based encryption technology. This technology is reported to be several times faster than traditional communication lines and will be useful to the finance industry and to internet firms that handle massive data. According to recent data, China's exports of high-tech products in 2005 amounted to $220 billion, a stunning increase of 100-fold compared to 1989. In May of 2017, China inaugurated its first domestically produced commercial jet aircraft. The C919 is a single-aisle commercial aircraft built for medium-haul flights with 174 seats. Twin engines built by Commercial Aircraft Corporation of China, COMAC. According to a report from China Daily, Mr. Zhu Jirong, deputy chief designer of the aircraft company, indicated that more than 50% of the components of the aircraft were sourced locally in China. So China is building its own aircraft as a competitor to Boeing and Airbus. Let me say a few words about the Belt and Road Initiative. In 2013, the President of China, Mr. Xi Jinping, proposed the building of the Silk Road Economic Belt and the 21st Century Silk Road Initiative as a mechanism to promote cooperation, connectivity, and trade along the Asian Silk routes which link China to Asia, Europe, and Africa. In announcing the plan, the President pointed out that over 2,000 years ago, ancestors of the Chinese people traveled over deserts and seas and created ancient silk routes that linked the East and the West. These routes were routes of trade, friendly engagement among the nations, and embodied a spirit of peace, cooperation, and mutual benefit. This project is designed to promote trade, infrastructure development, and cooperation among the countries of the Silk Road Economic Belt, which include more than 60 countries and organizations along the original Silk Road. The objective of the project is in line with China's declared international policies to promote peace, development, cooperation, and mutual benefit to the countries involved. A recent report on this initiative shows that Chinese companies have invested more than $50 billion in 56 economic and trade cooperation zones in 20 countries. This project has been called the Chinese Marshall Plan and is reported to have a value of $1 trillion. Let me say a word about China's investment profile. If we were to examine China's investment profile, we recognize that China is investing globally, all around the world. Cuba, 6.7 billion. Ivory Coast, 4 billion. Ethiopia, 3.7 billion. Zimbabwe, 3.6 billion. Cameroon, 3.4 billion. Nigeria, 3.1 billion. Tanzania, 3.1 billion. Cambodia, 3.1 billion. Sri Lanka, 2.8 billion. Ghana, 2.5 billion. Top recipients of Chinese overseas assistance or investment: Russia, 35.6 billion, Pakistan, 16 billion, Angola, 13.4 billion, Venezuela, 10.6 billion, Ecuador, 9.7 billion, Brazil, 8.5 billion, Sri Lanka, 8.2 billion, and Kyrgyzstan, 6.7 billion. Let me say a few words about a relationship which I think is important for us. Chile, country in South America, was the first country in South America to establish diplomatic relations with China in 1970. In 2005, Chile was the first country in Latin America to establish a free trade agreement with China. In 2016, Chile became the #1 exporter of fruit to China with a value of $1.2 billion. And China has become the #1 market for Chilean wine, and Chile is the biggest exporter of copper to China. Bilateral trade between Chile and China is worth $31 billion. The agreement is now being upgraded to include a new phase, which will include investment in infrastructure, renewable energy, finance, and connectivity between Chile and China. Ladies and gentlemen, the economic reforms carried out in China in the last 40 years have resulted in a new country, a country that has become an economic powerhouse, that has become the second largest economy in the world, that in the process has removed some 529 million people from poverty, and with a goal to eliminate extreme poverty from the country by 2021. I therefore believe that if the international financial sector is an important part of your economy, you should be interested in the 2.3 million millionaires in China and the 358 billionaires. If tourism is your business, you should be interested in the 100 million Chinese tourists that are traveling around the world, spending $102 billion per year. And if you're selling products in the international market, you should be interested in the 500 million Chinese middle class in China. If you're interested in incorporating technology and innovation into your development process, you should look at how the Chinese do it. And if you're interested in reducing poverty, you should probably take a look at their strategies. I wish to share with you.
I think that there's also fundamentally a major misunderstanding of China in this country. And let me tell you what the major misunderstanding is. You've seen that China was ruled by Communist Party in 1949, ruled by Communist Party in 1979, it will be ruled by Communist Party 2019, and you assume that China hasn't changed. It's still being run by the same Communist Party. But the Chinese Communist Party has obviously changed fundamentally. I mean, I went to China for the first time in 1980. When I went to China for the first time in 1980, the Chinese people didn't have the freedom. They couldn't choose what to wear. They all wore Maoist suits. Yeah. They couldn't choose where to live, where to work, what to study. And certainly zero Chinese could travel overseas, zero. Now you go back to China, the Chinese people can choose what to wear, where to live, where to work, where to study. And guess what? Every year, 120 million Chinese, right? I think it's more than the population in California. 120 million Chinese leave China freely as tourists. Amazingly, 120 million Chinese return to China freely. Now, if China was a communist, gulag, Stalinist state, would you go back to China? And so there's a complete misunderstanding of China. Clearly, while the political freedoms in China haven't increased, the personal freedoms of the Chinese people has exploded. And I can tell you, one of the questions that future historians will be very puzzled by is the judgments made by America on China. And I'll tell you why they'll be puzzled. The United States of America is about 240 years old. Chinese history maybe 2,400 years old. In today's world, you have a society which is 240 years old, passing judgment on a society which is 2,400 years old, and at a time when China has had its best 30 years of history, the Americans are telling Chinese, you guys are not doing very well. Really, you should change your political system. Listen to us, become a democracy, all will be well with you. And I can tell you one thing, that Chinese leaders, there's a whole shades of opinion among them. The one complete point of agreement that they all have is that they saw what happened to the Soviet Communist Party. They saw what happened to the Soviet Union. They saw what happened to Russia. It went overnight to a democracy. Guess what? The Russian economy imploded. Life expectancy came down. Infant mortality went up. The Russian people suffered. And the Chinese said, this is what happens when you have an instant democracy. So when the Chinese said, Give us time. Let us transform our political system at our own rate. I said, let them do it. Why do you think that you would know better what's good for them? Does that reflect the fact that for 200 years you got used to doing it, telling the world how they should behave, and therefore you think you can be a better judge of the rest of the world? So that judgmental character in the West has got to adapt to the rest of the world, because the rest of the world today is less willing to be judged by you.
That was a clip from Professor Kishore Mahbubani, who's a distinguished professor at the University of Singapore. And those were his thoughts on China's reform that I thought I would share with you as part of my presentation. I wish to go on now to talk a little bit about China's policy for Latin America and the Caribbean. In our region, Latin America and the Caribbean, most of the countries of South America have consolidated relationships with China in the last decade, driven mainly by China's growing need for commodities and Latin America's ability to supply. In 2008, the government of China issued its first policy paper on Latin America and the Caribbean, putting forward the goal of establishing a comprehensive and cooperative partnership featuring equality, mutual benefit, and common development with Latin American and Caribbean countries. The proposal was revised in 2016. In 2014, the Forum of China and the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, China CELAC Forum, was established to provide a new platform for simultaneous and complementary development of bilateral and collective cooperation. In 2015, the first ministerial meeting of China's CELAC Forum was held in Beijing under the theme, New Platform, New Starting Point, New Opportunity, Joint Efforts to Promote China-Latin American Caribbean Partnership of Comprehensive Cooperation. A plan of action for cooperation in trade, investment, tourism, culture, and sport was agreed to and signed. The framework agreement was reaffirmed and strengthened in the second ministerial forum in Santiago, Chile in January of this year. In 2015, or since 2015, there have been frequent high-level exchange and political dialogue all around, and rapid development in trade, investment, finance, and other areas, and increase in close cultural and people-to-people exchanges. The two sides have also supported and closely coordinated with each other on foreign policy. China has set some targets. China has agreed to raise the trade volume between China and CELAC countries, that's the countries of Latin America and the Caribbean, to $500 billion, and China's direct investment volume in the region to $250 billion by 2025. This is a China target. The question that I would ask as I give this lecture, what are our targets? Have we internalized these proposals? And have we been able to develop a strategy which would allow us to share with the Chinese our perspectives on these particular targets? And how can we utilize these targets to advance our social and economic development? Within the context of the CELAC relationship, China has established 3 funds that would be important to us. A preferential loans fund of $10 billion, a China-LAC cooperation fund of $5 billion, and a special loan fund for China-Latin America infrastructure development of $20 billion. These funds are managed by the Chinese through the various banks, the Exim Bank or the China Development Bank, and have been offered to the region. Let me say a word about international relations and diplomacy today. There's a move away from ideological policy approaches in diplomacy in a bipolar world to a greater interdependence of states in a multipolar world. Common concerns such as terrorism, food security, cyber security, the eradication of poverty, climate change, sustainable renewable energy, trade, social and economic development are now central themes. And all of this came out of the first development of the Millennium Development Goals. Now we have a new set of Millennium Development Goals to 2030. Governments today are promoting more open policies and offering the private sector and civil society more opportunities in economic and social development. This approach suggests the need for more coordination and communication of foreign policy and development agenda of the country with the private sector and civil society, and more sharing of information with these entities on the agreements and the treaties in which the country is involved. The new government of Barbados, led by Prime Minister the Honorable Mia Motley, has clearly stated that Barbados and Barbadians must engage the world. The BLP manifesto states, and I quote, "Barbadians must be fully equipped with the skills, the boldness, and the confidence to take risks, seize opportunities, and compete in the dynamic international economy of the 21st century. Our international relations, like our domestic policy, will be geared toward moving Barbados to the next level of its economic growth and social development, and helping to build the best Barbados." End of quote. This futuristic vision suggests to me that Barbados must forge a new international agenda going forward. This futuristic vision is necessary. This futuristic vision is important. In my view, the agenda should have a number of components. Barbados should engage the world, not just the United Kingdom, Europe, Canada, and the United States. We are clearly underrepresented in our relations in the countries of Asia, Africa, and Latin America. We must establish strategic partnerships and learn from successful countries of the world, including, and this is just a small set, Norway, Chile, Costa Rica, Singapore, New Zealand, Uruguay, Mauritius, Malta, and China, among others. These are countries that have shown success in a variety of ways, and there are a number of elements of their development from which we can learn. Our international relations should have an economic development focus and should not only be about the opportunity to participate in the global conversation and take care of the diaspora. Our international relations, in my view, should have an economic focus. Our foreign policy should incorporate the expertise of professionals trained in finance and economics, tourism, investment promotion, export promotion, environment and renewable energy, science and technology, food and agriculture, education, and other emerging areas of our national agenda. We must take a leadership role in CARICOM and seek to energize the regional integration process. We must contribute more and take a leadership role in the agenda for small island developing states. and we must promote more private sector participation in our international affairs. We must promote a multilingual society. Young people in Barbados should be encouraged and facilitated to become bilingual, whether it is Spanish, Portuguese, French, or Mandarin. Knowledge of a second language changes the way we see the world and opens possibilities for international careers. We will be better able to engage the world if we become a multilingual society. This was recently emphasized by our Prime Minister. Given this idea of a new agenda, what should the embassies of our country look like? I believe that the embassy of the 21st century should look a little different from the embassy of the 20th century. The embassies of Barbados should serve to advance the economic well-being of Barbados through the implementation of an agenda for functional development cooperation designed to contribute to the diversification of the Barbados economy and address critical development challenges such as food insecurity, high energy costs, high unemployment, the need for investment and diversification of the international finance and tourism sector. In other words, the embassies, like the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, in my view, should have a development focus. In spite of the new global scenario, the embassies of Barbados and some small developing countries have remained essentially the same as in the immediate post-independence period, a heavy emphasis on political diplomacy and consular affairs. Embassies should demonstrate their worth by the amount of business they generate, whether this is measured by tourist numbers, export of Barbados products, business and investments negotiated, art and cultural industries exchange, joint ventures to bring Barbadian innovative ideas to market. Each embassy should show a return on the investment which is more than the cost of the embassy. I believe, therefore, that our embassy of Barbados in China should have 7 fundamental goals. And this is something which I presented while I was in China. Our embassy should implement a development agenda that is focused on the promotion of business opportunities between Barbados and China. It should be the focal point for cooperation with the countries of the wider Asia-Pacific region, including Japan, South Korea, India, Malaysia, Thailand, Singapore, and Vietnam. In this regard, our embassy in China, in my view, should have a regional focus and a regional dimension, and should provide non-resident representation to Japan, South Korea, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, India, Thailand, among others. Such an approach would allow us to engage the world at low costs, because the embassy then would have a regional dimension. You have one ambassador, but with non-resident representation to a number of countries, reducing the cost of representation. The embassy, of course, should strengthen Caribbean regional cooperation with the People's Republic of China in areas of strategic interest to the Caribbean. Promote a positive image of Barbados in the People's Republic of China. Promote friendly and cordial relations between the government and people of Barbados and China, and protect the security of Barbadians in the People's Republic of China. In that context, we need a new architecture. There should be a commercial consular in the embassy to promote more strategic linkages between the private sector of Barbados and the private sector of China. We could appoint a tourism official in Beijing to promote Barbados as a destination for Chinese tourists. We could appoint a professional in finance to establish linkages between the financial sector in China and the international financial sector of Barbados to tap those 2.3 million millionaires. The need to allow line ministries associated with areas, energy, agriculture, etc., to locate in the embassy for short periods, not necessarily on a long-term basis, but locate in the embassy for short periods to promote a development agenda. And the need to foster student exchange and help promote mutual understanding by providing a Barbadian government scholarship to China for a Chinese national to study in our university in an area of relevance to China. Let me interject a point here that I think is important to make. We said earlier this evening that the initiative between the university and Suzhou Institute of Technology in training software engineers is an important initiative. For the first time, in 2 years' time, we're going to have a batch of software engineers in the Caribbean. But I must make the point that the achievement of this initiative was due to the wisdom and the vision of people in the university. Dr. Shea Corbin, Dr. Anthony Fisher, and Vice Chancellor Sir Hilary Beckles. An embassy in a country can open the door, but it is the professionals in the fields of interest that walk in and make development possible. And this is a very important point as we move forward. I'd like to say a few words now about the private sector. Over the years, Barbados and China have concluded a number of treaty networks which include economic and technical cooperation agreement, double taxation agreement, cultural agreement, and agreement for cooperation in education, science, and technology. And while there has been a considerable amount of government-to-government interaction over the years based on these agreements, there has been limited cooperation in investment and trade between Chinese private sector and the Barbados private sector. This continues to be the situation in spite of numerous pronouncements, trade missions, visits, agreements, proposals, which have been signed and presented, suggesting and outlining the need for greater private sector participation in the relationship. Recently, the government of China launched its Go Global policy, where the Chinese private sector is being encouraged to seek new markets through joint ventures, investment, and partnerships in international markets. Keen interest is being shown in the Caribbean countries by Chinese entrepreneurs, as can be seen in the report of the China Trade and Economic Forum recently held in Trinidad and Tobago. The visit of the President of China, Mr. Xi Jinping, to the Caribbean in 2013 created increased awareness in China about the Caribbean. It is the view of this paper that the lack of robust private sector interaction is due to a lack of a specific mechanism to foster private sector cooperation between Barbados and China. In this regard, the paper proposes the establishment of a Barbados China Private Sector Council. The correct name, as designated here, is Barbados China Trade and Investment Council. And this would be a mechanism to bring private sector persons in Barbados and private sector persons in China together to explore investment and joint venture initiatives, holding meetings in Beijing or Bridgetown, depending on the situation. The objective of the Council would be to serve as a bilateral platform to enhance commercial and investment initiatives between Barbados and China, driven by private sector entities with the support of the relevant government institutions. The Barbados Embassy in China, the Chinese Embassy in Barbados would be asked to support this initiative in order to make it possible. The Council would help to build trust and confidence between the Chinese and Barbados private sector and provide information for Barbadian entrepreneurs on how to do business in China. Some outcomes of the Council could be the promotion of Barbados as a world-class financial services sector, the attraction of high net worth Chinese to Barbados to invest in our international financial sector, and the promotion of Barbados as a place of political and financial stability, peace, leisure, and recreation. Let me go on to say a few words about regional cooperation. China has demonstrated its willingness to engage the Caribbean, both within the CELAC mechanism and as individual countries, and the Caribbean in its own right. Our Caribbean countries, however, seem to have no regional policy with respect to China. I believe, therefore, that Barbados should pursue with other countries of the Caribbean who have diplomatic relations with China a regional strategy that addresses regional concerns. The opportunities under the China CELAC Forum remain to be explored. In the meeting held, China CELAC meeting in Santiago, Chile, the countries of Latin America and the Caribbean expressed support for the Belt and Road Initiative, and it is reported that Trinidad and Tobago has signed a memorandum of understanding as a partner institution of the initiative. I believe, however, that there's room for concrete regional actions to take advantage of the $3 billion offered to the region. I believe that the Caribbean should pursue with China a free trade agreement to address the large and increasing trade imbalance between the Caribbean and China. For example, in 2013, China exported to the region, China's exports to the region were about $4.21 billion, while Caribbean exports to China was just $1.8 billion. It is clear that the region could benefit from a free trade agreement that allows for access of more Caribbean products into the vast Chinese market. Caribbean leaders should support the proposal to establish a Caribbean Trade and Tourism Center in Tianjin, in China. This center would act as a platform to enhance commercial relations between the Caribbean and China through public and private sector initiatives. Details of this proposal, the proposal for this center, are still being worked out. Other projects for consideration, in my view, would include a regional marine transport system, a strengthened regional security system, support for early warning systems for disaster preparedness, support for the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency in its effort to provide emergency assistance to the countries, support to the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility, CCRIF, which seeks to provide short-term liquidity to start recovery efforts in Caribbean countries in the aftermath of disasters. This facility, which is managed by the World Bank, has limited financial resources to respond to the devastation that currently affects the region. China could be asked for financial contribution to the facility, either directly through the Belt and Road Initiative or through the Caribbean Development Bank. And we should also seek China's support for a regional program of food and nutrition security for the Caribbean to arrest the tsunami of chronic non-communicable diseases such as diabetes, hypertension, obesity, and other lifestyle diseases which are a threat to Caribbean development. Just recently, I read a report which indicated that 1/3 of our children are obese. It's a very serious situation, taking into consideration that our children are our future. I believe, therefore, looking toward the future, that we should establish with China a comprehensive strategic partnership that would have at its core equality, mutual trust, solidarity, and mutual respect. The partnership should have areas of cooperation that redound to the social and economic development of our country. I've identified 6 areas that I think are critically important. Cooperation with China in areas of strategic interest to Barbados and the Caribbean community and Caribbean integration within the context of the CELAC mechanism. Cooperation in areas of common interest to Barbados and to China in the international arena, such as security, climate change, poverty reduction, support for the program of small island developing states, and the pursuit of ideals of peaceful coexistence of nations as described in the principles of the United Nations Charter, as well as other widely accepted norms for international relations. Cooperation in the implementation of a program of development cooperation in 10 strategic areas: in trade, in tourism, in finance, in science and technology, in education, in sports and culture, in security, in renewable energy, in food and agriculture, and in public health. Cooperation with China in examining the China development model to determine whether there are lessons that we could learn for our own development. For example, poverty reduction. The strategies that they have used may be of interest. I'm not saying that they can be transferred, but they may be of interest. The strategy for incorporation, science and technology in development could be of interest. Cooperation with China in the establishment of a Barbados-China Trade and Investment Council. And I think Barbados should become, or should consider, becoming a member of the Asian Infrastructure Development Bank and a member of the Belt and Road Initiative. In conclusion, Barbados should consider the pursuit of the establishment of a comprehensive strategic partnership with China, and should also work with Caribbean countries to promote greater cooperation between China and the region. This partnership should be based on mutual respect, win-win cooperation, and the recognition of the contribution of small developing countries to the world. In so doing, we do not need to abandon our ties with our traditional North Atlantic partners, Canada, England, United States. What we seek to do is to diversify our international relations with other successful countries of the world going forward. According to a recent reflection by Warren Buffett, the CEO of Berkshire Hathaway, and considered one of the richest men in the world, as presented by Yahoo Finance, Buffett said, "What they have done in 50 to 60 years is a total economic miracle. I never thought it could have happened." End of quote. Quoting him again, "What I do know is that they have found a secret sauce for themselves, just like we found the secret sauce a couple of centuries ago." Buffett says countries will do it differently, referring to the fundamental difference between China and the US politically. China's state capitalism emphasizes growth and social stability with tight controls over domestic policies and information. Since economic reforms in 1978, China has grown at a staggering rate of 9.5% per year, according to Buffett, and has become the world's second largest economy. In the past 5 years, China's GDP has slowed, but it still achieved last year an increase of 6.9%, dwarfing America's 2.3%. He gave a final comment in his address, which I think is important. In his final comment, he said, and I quote, "The main thing you have to do in development is unleash the potential of your people." End of quote. The opening of our embassy in China in 2010 was a good decision. At the opening event, the event was filled with great expectations. In his address at the opening, our first resident ambassador and former Prime Minister Sir Lloyd Erskine Sandiford said, and I quote, "Barbados will use its embassy and its premises to promote the foreign policy goals and the interests of the government and people of Barbados, including its diplomatic thrusts and its economic, financial, commercial, social, and cultural initiatives. It will seek to develop synergistic collaboration between Barbados and China in the areas of import and export, education, science, technology, investment, sport and tourism, arts, and popular culture." End of quote. Ladies and gentlemen, I put it to you tonight that the vision of Sir Lloyd, which I share, will not be achieved until we establish a foreign policy focused on economic and social development of Barbados, and we embrace China in a new comprehensive strategic partnership as presented here. I believe that a more strategic partnership with China could be a window of opportunity for Barbados and the Caribbean. If we grasp the opportunity, it could assist in the transformation of our economies. The challenges which we face today are not insurmountable. Let us not dwell on the negatives of the past, but let us embrace the future of promise, prosperity, and justice. I believe that the time has come to revisit the legacy of our first Prime Minister, the late Right Honorable Errol Walton Barrow, as we continue to be friends of all and satellites of none. I thank you.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your kind attention to Dr. Brathwaite this evening. First of all, thank you, Deputy Principal, and through you, the Principal, for being behind us in this endeavor this evening as we celebrate Confucius Institute Day. Thank you, Dr. Marshall, for your very comprehensive introduction of Dr. Brathwaite. You have pointed to several facets of his life, which certainly equated him to come here this evening and speak to us. I have to thank Dr. Brathwaite for your very detailed presentation, which I think certainly is now, fodder for a lot more research and thinking as we go forward. It's a very comprehensive presentation. I had to be in and out of the room dealing with some logistical issues, but certainly it is a lot of material in there for thinking, and I believe this evening has inspired some possibilities for further cooperation and activities that have already been initiated. Thanks to the staff at the Confucius Institute for all of their efforts in bringing this event here to what you have experienced this evening for the last 2+ hours, sending out the notices, the responses, putting up the decorations, all of those activities that brought us to this point this evening. I also have to thank the media services people, the ushers, for all of their kind efforts to, again, support this event. I also want in the audience to make special mention of 4 people that have special importance to me. Former PMO Sonia Welch, I would count her as one of my key mentors. Former Ambassador Michael King, refers to me as his assistant and deputy in Washington, D.C. Former permanent representative to the UN, Ambassador Chris Hackett, and former High Commissioner to the United Kingdom, Guy Hewitt. First of all, I must draw your attention to where you have spent the last 2+ hours, not just the Arts Lecture Theatre of the Faculty of Humanities and Education, but the Cynthia Wilson Arts Lecture Theatre, recently refurbished and renamed. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Bear with us during the difficulties created by the rain, which happily abated during all of the day and allowed you to get here. I wish you all safe trips home. Be very careful on the road, it's wet. Thank you very much.